Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome. I am currently live on LinkedIn and YouTube. So let me know where you are listening in from today and let me know if you can hear me okay. But welcome. It's great to have you join for this Beyond English Fluency live session. I'm Gemma Keeling, and I'm really excited for you to join. And I am going to be sharing a very short and sweet lesson today. And I'm excited to share that with you. So let me know where you are listening in from. This morning, I have some tea. I have some mint tea this morning. So let me know, where are you watching from? And do you have your favorite drink? Are you drinking tea or coffee today? Or maybe something else, maybe just water. I also have my water with me today. Okay, so I am going to be sharing in today's live session all about some particular phrasal verbs that you would use when it comes to making comparisons. Now, before I do, I want to share just a little bit about myself, and then also that I go live every Tuesday. I go live on LinkedIn and on YouTube, so it's good to thank you for those that also are joining on YouTube. I will start to post more videos there every week. Okay, I have none front, a cup of Colombian coffee. Very nice. Colombian coffee. That sounds very good. I usually have coffee every morning, but this morning I was awake very early and I like to have my breakfast and then I would drink coffee. But this morning I had a nice cup of mint tea, but I will have my coffee after this session. I will have some coffee. But nice Colombian coffee. Very delicious. Are you from Colombia? I can't see your name, so I'm not sure who's commenting. But where are you listening from? Are you from Colombia with the Colombian coffee? Or you just like Colombian coffee? Let me know. Very nice. Okay. So I usually, as I mentioned, oh yes, from Colombia. Welcome. Great to have you. Okay, I can see your name now. For some reason, I can't see your name on StreamYard, but I can see your name is coming through on LinkedIn. So, yeah. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining from Colombia. I think is it 10 in the morning? So it's morning for you. So good morning. Thank you for joining. It's wonderful to have you here. So I usually go live every single week. And in our last session, I shared some of the common confusing verbs. So we looked at, for example, the difference between to look at and to watch. So that was in our last live session. And today we're going to do something a bit different. And we're looking at comparisons and the language that you can use for comparisons. And comparisons can be used to highlight different similarities. They can be used to highlight disadvantages or advantages and to make informed decisions. So, for example, you might compare when you're comparing products or services. So when you think about marketing and sales, comparisons are often used to highlight the features and the benefits of a product or service. For example, a salesperson might say, our product is more cost-effective than competitors, and that's a comparison. Now we're going to look very specifically at phrasal verbs that you can use to compare, and especially ones that you would use at work. So phrasal verbs are commonly used in English, and I was asked a very interesting question yesterday, and I'm going to answer that. And the question that they asked me was, is it necessary to learn phrasal verbs? And I think it's a good question. Is it necessary, or could I just use the regular verb? And I think to use phrasal verbs And phrasal verbs are idiomatic expressions. So instead of saying to give, we would say to give up, or to give up on something. So that's a phrasal verb. Now, one thing is with phrasal verbs is it has a very specific meaning, and it can be very helpful when, it could be confusing if you don't give the full understanding of, the full part of the phrasal verb. So it can really help when it comes to being more specific in your language. And you can also use them when it comes to, making your conversation sound more natural, more native-like, and just really improving your overall fluency. So I would say yes, they are. Now, I do know many of my students who tell me, I prefer not to use phrasal verbs and just try to stick with using language that I know. And I think really that's the difference from going from a more intermediate level to advanced to even higher level of fluency, is being able to not only understand these, because they are used so frequently by different English speakers. And sometimes you can't always get the exact meaning or the nuances of language without understanding these phrasal verbs. So it might be that you're not always comfortable to use them, and that's okay. You can, gradually, the way to do that is you need to understand their meaning and the different contexts that they're used in. And they're difficult because, the combinations, it's not always obvious from the individual words what the meaning is. So that's why it can be so complex. But I think it is possible to learn at least the meanings of them. And then when you have conversations, or you're listening and watching movies and series or reading articles, you can understand maybe from going from like 75% understanding to maybe 90% understanding when you understand different phrasal verbs, for example. So we're going to look in today's session at the phrasal verbs you can use when it comes to making comparisons. As we go through, if you have any questions, please let me know. If you've just joined now, welcome. Let me know where you are watching from. I'm currently in Mexico. So I live in Mexico, but I am from the south of England. So I'm originally from England, and I'm here in Mexico. So that's a little bit about me. Okay, so let's get started with the first one. I'm going to share with you the first one, and that's used for comparisons. And that is to compete with. To compete with. Now, to compete with means to be as good as something else. So to compete with means to be as good as something else. For example, old mobile phones can't compete with today's smartphones. So old mobile phones can't compete with today's smartphones. So we could say old mobile phones are not as good as today's smartphones. So we're doing a comparison. Old mobile phones can't compete with or be as good as. They can't compete with today's smartphones. And it usually means to be in rivalry or competition with someone or something, usually to achieve similar or a better outcome. So for example, we could also use it to say, our company competes with several other firms in the same industry. So it competes with. Now, this can be confusing because sometimes we could hear compete on, and I'll share what that means. It has a different meaning. So we can say compete with, and we would compete with someone or something. For example, you would compete with someone in a race or in a competition. That's where it comes from. Compete is a competition. So in your industry, who do you consider your biggest competitors? Who does your company compete with? who does your company compete with? Now, one thing I mentioned is we can say to compete with, and to compete with means to be as good as something else. But if we say to compete on, it has a different meaning. Now, to compete on is typically used with the price, to compete on the price. To compete on is for a specific aspect or factor. So, for example, to compete on the price, or it could be to compete on a particular quality or feature when in competition with others. So in this market, we need to compete on price if we want to attract more customers, for example. Okay, we can also, so we've looked at to compete with, not to be confused with to compete on. So this is where it can be confusing is, instead of just saying to compete with and to compete on have very slight different nuances of meaning. And we wouldn't say to compete with the price. It wouldn't be really bad to say that, but it's just more commonly used, and it's better to say to compete on the price. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So we're looking at phrasal verbs and language that you can use when making comparisons. For those of you that are just tuning in, welcome. Okay, the next one we have is to measure up. To measure up. Now, to measure would be when I am, for example, I measure my height. I'm looking at my height, the size of something. I can measure something. Now, to measure up means to be of a sufficient standard or quality, and especially when comparing to a specific expectation or benchmark. So, for example, when we're talking about performance, we could say the new employee's performance has been excellent, and she measures up to our high standards. So to measure up. And simply to measure up means to be as good as people had hoped. Like, I really hope that something is good. You could say, did it measure up? Yes, it was even better than I expected. Maybe if you think about a particular movie or a series, for example, when you watch a spin-off show, I say that, I think last time I mentioned that I was watching Young Sheldon. And if you watch The Big Bang Theory, and then you might ask, do you think that Young Sheldon measures up to Big Bang Theory? Like, is it as good as? Does it exceed your expectations? Or maybe does it compare to something else? And I think so. I think it does measure up. Let me know. Have you watched a series, for example, a spin-off series, and did it measure up? Let me know. Did it measure up? Was it as good as what you were expecting? Hello, welcome. Great to have you. Nice to see you here today. Good morning. Okay, so I am sharing phrasal verbs that you can use when it comes to comparisons. So we've looked firstly at, thank you, all the very best. That's very kind. Thank you. So we've looked at the first one. The first one we looked at was to compete with. To compete with meaning to be as good as something else. So we have to compete with, and we can also say to measure up. To measure up. And to measure up is being, if it's as good as people had hoped. So my question for you is, have you maybe watched a show or a spin-off show, or maybe it could be a movie that measured up? Was it as good as your expectations? Was it as good as what you were hoping or expecting? So we can use these 4 comparisons, and you might hear them at work, for example, with to measure up. We could talk about performance. Does her performance measure up to our high standards? Does the quality compare, to a specific benchmark or expectation? Okay, so we have to measure up. Let me know, have you watched a show or maybe a movie and did it measure up? What was the movie and did it measure up? Let us know. Okay, now I'm going to do another one, and we have to improve on. And to improve on means to make something better than it was before. So for example, we have improved on our customer service by implementing a more efficient support system. So to improve on. And to improve on just simply means to do something better than before. To improve on. So for example, I could talk about a particular product, and I might say, let me think, I'm trying to think of an example at the top of my head. Maybe a particular skill or a particular service, and I want to make it better. I would say to improve on. So I'm sure if you're watching this, for many of you, you are looking to improve on your English vocabulary. And it's something that you would like to get better at. So is there a particular maybe aspect of English that you would like to improve on? Is there something that you would like to improve on when it comes to maybe speaking or language? Or it could be a completely different skill. What is something that you would like to improve on? It could be learning another language, could be a particular skill. It could be maybe I can say I want to improve on my fitness. I'm going to the gym and I would like to improve on my health. I want to get better, or I want to surpass a previous standard. So to improve on. So let me know, is there something that you are working to improve on? And what is it? Are you improving on your maybe English vocabulary? What is something that you're working to improve on? Let me know. Okay, so we have the last one, and the last one is to live up to. To live up to. And this phrasal verb means to meet or exceed our expectations. Now, as you can see, many of the ones I'm sharing with you are quite similar, but they're all used for comparisons. So to live up to, this phrasal verb means to exceed our expectations. For example, our latest product release has received excellent reviews and is living up to the high standard or the high expectations of our customers. So it's common to hear living up to and then expectations, living up to our expectations, or it's living up to my expectations. That's a phrase that we would use. And it means to meet or even surpass the standards or hopes that we set. And those standards could be for ourselves or they could be on other things. So often living up to expectations involves meeting the standards and hopes that other people have. So that can be, for example, our family members or our friends or our colleagues or other professionals. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Paula has joined and said, I don't have much time, but I always listen to the Canada radio app to improve my listening. Yeah, that's nice. And I'm not sure of the Canada radio app. I'll have to check that out. Is it a talk show? Do you listen to people discussing? Is it a talk show? Or yeah, I'd love to hear about that. I'd have to check it out. But that's great. Yeah, I don't always have time to, but I always listen to the Canada radio app. I'm not sure about that one, but it's a good way to practice your listening. Thank you for joining, Paola. Okay, so we have to live up to expectations. Now, sometimes to live up to expectations, like I said, it could be your own expectations, but it can also be family or someone else's. It could be your superiors in a professional setting. And in a work context, this may involve how well you perform in your job, maybe how the expectations of meeting project deadlines or achieving certain tasks or targets at work. Yes. Oh, okay. That's great. It's the BBC News from Canada. Wonderful. And are you living in Canada? Or do you just like to listen to Canadian English? I like to listen to Canadian English. I really like the accent. I have some Canadian friends, and it's always I like to listen to Canadian English. But I think it's very good practice to listen to radio talk shows. I used to do that when I mean I live in Mexico now, but before, when I was learning Spanish as a teenager, I would listen to the radio, the Mexican radio, actually, many years ago. And I also listened to the radio in Spain while I was in my house, when I was working. Okay, no, you live in Colombia. Okay, we have another Colombian. Welcome. It's good to create that environment. So I love that. I love that you listen to the radio from Canada. It's nice that you chose Canada. That's great. Okay, so thinking about this phrasal verb, so we have to live up to someone's expectations. So to live up to. So what are maybe some ideals, or what's something that you set yourself that you would like to live up to? Maybe it could be thinking about work or your personal expectations that you have. It can be challenging. It can be challenging if you have very high expectations for yourself. I know that's common with many of the clients that I work with, because many of them are high achievers, or they are working, creative professionals working as designers, and not always, but typically for a creative professional, they have very high expectations that they want to live up to, and that could be in their design work or in their work itself. So do you set very high expectations that you feel you need to live up to? I know that's something that can be quite common, not just with those working in creative fields, but typically, we have a lot of expectations on ourselves of how well we will perform, myself included. Okay, so we've looked at phrasal verbs today that you can use when it comes to talking about comparisons. And the comparisons, these are very helpful no matter what job role you have, but particularly if you're working with products and services, it's very, no matter what role you have, you would be comparing. So we've looked at to compete with, and to compete with means to be as good as something else. We also have to improve on, and to improve on is to do better than before, to do something better than before. We can also say to measure up, and to measure up means to be as good as people had hoped. And to live up to has that same meaning as well. So we can say they are synonyms. To measure up. I know that can be a little bit difficult to pronounce. So to measure up, and to live up to, both have the same meaning as being as good as people had hoped. So we've looked at 4 different phrasal verbs that you can use when it comes to making comparisons. Now, there's more for sure, and I think one thing is why it's so difficult is there are just so many ways to explain your ideas and convey your ideas in English, and especially through phrasal verbs. And if you've just joined, I was saying earlier that I had a really great question, and someone asked me, is it necessary to learn phrasal verbs? Do I really have to use them? And I understand, because there are so many. And not only that, there's so many, but they can be very confusing. It's not easy to determine and understand the meaning of a phrasal verb just from reading it. And many times the meaning can change, just like we've seen with our first example of the difference between to compete with and to compete on. And the meaning is just very slightly different. And there is a difference of using to compete with or to compete on. And that's just one example. So I know that they can be very challenging. And a good way to overcome that is to learn these in context and to listen to the examples. And the first step is really being able to understand them. Once you have that understanding, you will start to notice them. You will notice them in conversation. If you are listening to the Canada radio app, for example, you will start to hear because they're used very frequently. And it may be that you get part of the meaning. Maybe you don't fully understand everything. But eventually you will start to notice the nuances and the slight differences of language. And a lot of that comes from phrasal verbs. And it really will take you from being a more intermediate, maybe an advanced level, to an even higher level of fluency by learning these. So that's why I am sharing these in our lessons. And I hope that you find them helpful. I know I get a lot of requests for these types of sessions. So hopefully it's something that you enjoy. If you have listened today, thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. If you're watching the replay, make sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think. And if there's any others that you would like me to share or a particular area, I'm happy to do that. I do go live every week. But thank you for joining today. I typically go live for around 30 minutes. But if you ever have any questions, let me know. I'm here to help. I work with professionals to improve and transform their English speaking fluency and communication confidence. So they not only survive at work, but they really thrive in their professional career. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you for joining today. And I look forward to seeing you very soon. Take care. Bye.